I'm joined today by author Bruce McIntyre, and we are here to talk about his book, and I'm so excited to discuss it with him. It is called The Truth versus the Great Lie. Bruce, I love your title. It's so catchy, and I know the book is really about to tell me something. And so I'd love for you to just tell us a little bit about the book, if you would.
Well, it's possibly the most unique book in about 2,000 years. So it's was a labor of love. It took 5 years to write. And I need to tell you up front that I've written one other book, a history book, and I'm totally responsible for it. It was written with an outline like a normal writer would. This book's not like that. This book, I can only take credit for being a scribe um, in the old ancient sense of it, because I kept a ledger book, and the Holy Spirit, came to me 90 different times, 90 plus, over 90 times, and basically told me what was going to be in the book. And it was a unique way of writing. And yes, I physically wrote it, but I can't take credit for all the ideas. It's basically three books in one. And I even tried to change the title once, and the Holy Spirit wouldn't let me. So I can't even take claim for naming the book, but the front cover starts it off very interestingly. Um, that's the Star of Bethlehem in the middle, and then there's six stars around it. And the Lord revealed that to me in September 1997 at about 3 a.m. in the morning. And I got up, went to my office at 3 a.m. and drew it the best I could, and that's the cover of the book. The the book itself announces the imminent return of Jesus Christ for His church and the Holy Spirit. The the truth is the message that Jesus brought in the Bible. That is one of His names, and it's versus the great lie. The great lie is humanism, and it's been around since right after the Great Flood, 4 generations. Nimrod introduced it to the world, and then it wound up in Babylon, and it's been barreling through history like a ziggurat, a juggernaut, not the tower, but like a giant snowball rolling downhill. And now humanism encompasses every campus of every higher ed, elite or not, in the world, and it supersedes all the different political divisions. It's crazy. It's taken over the whole world. So that's the title, The Truth versus the Great Lie. It's really three books in one. Um, what inspired me to write it, I need to tell the world that September 20th, 2017, I went to bed like normal. At 3 a.m. precisely, I was awakened in my bed. I sat up, and the Lord was standing right there. And just like the Gospel of John, chapter 21, when he's talking to Simon Peter and he says, "Feed my lambs." And then he comes back to him and he says, "Tend my sheep." He looked at me like he was continuing that same chapter 21 of John discourse, and he said, "Feed my fish." And I immediately knew he wanted me to write a book. So I went and met with my pastor. And he said, "Well, what did he say to you?" He said, "Feed my fish." And my pastor looked a little befuddled. And I said, Nick, we've been fish since he fed 5,000 men. Um, and I said, then the fish symbol, in Greek, it's called the ichthus. That was how Christians avoided Roman persecution and death in the first century. So he said, well, what do you think he wants you to do? I said, he wants me to write a book about DNA because the church is being deceived. DNA, human DNA, proves the Bible, and he wants me to write that. So that started 5 years of writing. And part one of the book is dedicated to human DNA and how it proves Adam and Eve. In fact, it goes through, it follows the Human Genome Project, and once that was completed, within 2 years they found Adam and Eve. And the church should be shouting, jumping up and down, screaming from the rooftops, and we're not, because they refuse to call them biblical Adam and Eve or straight up Adam and Eve. It is mitochondrial Adam and Eve. And if you separate all the gobbledygook away, they found Adam and Eve. So the only thing that remains between the church shouting for joy or not is that they've got the mutation rate wrong. So part one is a science book for normal people, and it delves into human DNA, and it teaches you just enough so you can follow the argument that once they map the human genome, you can follow it backwards in time and end up, if you're female, at Mother Eve, and if you're a man, at Father Adam. And it's absolutely scientific fact, and nobody disputes it. The big fight today is whether science applies to the Bible. I argue in this book that our God is science. He's inseparable. So where it goes from there, part one is proving it to the church. Yeah, I'm not trying to prove to, a PhD at Stanford or Harvard or Oxford. I'm trying to take that scientific argument and prove it to a Christian anywhere in the world. Part two. So I thought I had the book done. The Lord said, no, says this one's written for PhDs. You've got to revise it. So it's got to be written to the average Christian that could read it, whether they're a layman or, a pastor or an evangelist. So I thought I was finished after another trip through it. And Lord said, okay, now I want you to use your clan history. Well, I'm descended from the oldest line of kings in the Western world, and that is the Scythian Scott Gael, with a stop for a few hundred years in Spain. And we have a history of the world. Starts at the book of beginnings, and it parallels from a different perspective Moses' book. So I'm an Irish Scottish Shonky, and that's the ancient style. That's the equivalent of about 4 or 5 PhDs. An ancient Shonky in Ireland could not practice their trade until they were above 40 years of age. So imagine going to university and then staying there for 20 years and getting 4 or 5 degrees. And then after you passed the test, then after age 40, you were allowed to be a Shonky. So you're like a multi-professor. But I believe what people will find interesting is Moses was an oral historian just like me. So Moses is the first witness of history, The Spirit moved on him, and he wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch and Job. And the Spirit moved on me, and I wrote The Truth versus the Great Lie. So I think what readers will find interesting is the history of the Hebrew clan, the oral history. That's what starts the Bible. That's the Pentateuch and the book of Job. Well, guess what? Scythian history, and Scythia was the the ancient country first identified um, right after the Great Flood. So if you go in the Bible, you break everybody down, and my ancestor Rephath, the Scot, is mentioned in Genesis. He's right there in the list of names. So that's a pretty old line of kings, and it's not. What's funny is the world, it has a funny view, a take on it. Everybody alive today has an ancient history just like mine. They just don't remember it. That's it's not traceable for them. So part 2 of the book takes the Scythian Scot Gael history of the world and puts it right up alongside Moses. It's compared and contrasted, and the two match. There's no differentiation. There's no minor variance. It is amazing. And I've included for readers in the back of the book the Irish history of the Book of Beginnings. So it's very different from Moses. Moses was much more elegant. My ancestors were the most matter of fact, literal. It's one of the shortest books you're ever going to read, and it step by step follows what Moses wrote. So that's really part 2. And I thought, again, I was done with the book. And this is about 4 years into writing it. And the Spirit came to me again and said, oh, I want you to explain what I did in Genesis 6:3. Because across the world right now, everybody is being bombarded with, we can live forever, we can replace body parts, we can reverse aging. And the Lord wanted the science addressed. So he explained to me what he did to limit human lifespan. And as a scribe, I wrote it down in this book. So the amazing thing is the different human lifespan studies ongoing at Stanford, Oxford, all around the world. They match right up with what he taught me and what I wrote. And basically, he says that, the 5 corporations in the San Francisco Bay Area started to improve and break, the human barrier, which sets in at about 115. The Bible states it's 120. Nobody gets past 120 without the Lord intervening. And once those studies, 50 years ago, nobody believed that there was a barrier to human lifespan, because human lifespan up to 1900 was 40 to 45 years. And I know that smacks in the face of a modern person, but the truth is the number 1 killer in the world was dysentery. And it wasn't cancer. It wasn't any of these modern things we worry about, because we've stretched out the human lifespan to, in most non-third world countries, to above 70 years of age. Now we're dying of all these other things. And ancient men would not have understood that. The Bible talks about gray hair being a mark of wisdom. And whether you're Native American or Scottish Highland clan or wherever you're from, that's been true throughout history, because hardly anybody got to 70 years old. That was an old person, 70 or 80. consequently, until they started these longevity studies at these elite higher eds, they didn't even believe there was a barrier. And sure enough, they found a barrier sets in between 100 and 115, and nobody gets past it. So the science in the book is in part one and part three. The history in the book is in part two. And throughout this time, the Lord gave me, through His Spirit, 6 different messages for the church. Again, the book is written for Christians in the worldwide church that follows Jesus Christ. It announces that the end of denominations, the imminent return of the Lord. And there's 5 messages for the church and 1 message for the world as a whole, and that's the cover of the book. When that sign appears, that's not for Christians. That sign on the cover of the book that will appear in the heavens is for the world, for mankind. So, again, what inspired me to write it? I was conscripted. Jesus woke me up, told me to feed
Sounds
his
like it. Yes. What actually inspired you to publish it? Because writing it is one thing, but publishing it is another. Was there something behind that where you were like, yes, I've written it now, Lord, and now I'm actually going to go through the process of publishing it and putting it out to the world?
That's an interesting story too, because the Holy Spirit came to me and said, this is not to go to a major publishing company that publishes, 300 different types of books. I was told it was to go to a Christian publishing company that only publishes books to Christians. And I actually got close to signing a deal with another publisher that will go unnamed, and the Holy Spirit stopped me. We set 3 meetings. We were going to sign a contract. I got stopped 3 times. So finally, I backed up, and one of my wife's cousins had written a book and published it through Christian Faith Publishing. And that night, after I realized that the Spirit had stopped me, would publish this other publisher, he came to me and said, try using your cousin's publishing company. And that was Christian Faith Publishing. And interestingly, once I started talking to them, everything fell into place. So I found the publisher the Lord wanted me to use.
You know what? That's usually always the best way to go with what he's looking for. I mean, I have to tell you, Bruce, the book just sounds incredible. I can see why it took you 5 years to write, because you have so much packed in there for the reader that I am sure it is just a wealth of knowledge and information and inspiration. I'm curious, before we go, I have to ask you, and I know you've shared a lot, but if there's any other little tidbit that you'd like to share with us about the book that you
Sure.
can give readers a glimpse into.
We had the whole book ready to go. And my whole life, I've been chasing the ancient city of Elath. But if you bear with me, my ancestors didn't call it Elath. My ancestors called it Capasiron. And the reason I was chasing it is the story in my family is that my ancestor met Moses and the elders of Israel, and that they had just come through the Red Sea. And I searched for it my entire adult life as a Shonky, and I had really pretty much given up hope of finding it, because if you reason with me, I've got a ancient Irish name for a city that's way over 3,000 years old, and the hope of finding it was pretty slim and none. So I had the book ready to go, and I was drawn to do a little more research, and I start reading Moses description of Exodus, and he's noting everywhere they stopped. You know, he's got 1 million people with him, and he's noting where they got water and where they did this and that. And my initial thought was we had met Moses as they were headed to Mount Sinai. I got all the way through to where they're camped at Mount Sinai for 2 years. And I had thought Mount Sinai was in Egypt. And the Lord had been showing me the latest archaeological discoveries, and it was actually in Saudi Arabia. And actually, that made sense because Moses' father-in-law walked up to the camp, if you recall that passage. And I thought, well, that's just crazy. So then they're there 2 years, and Moses decamps them from Mount Sinai and walks them back to civilization. So I've got a scaled map in front of me. I've got my dividers, and I'm doing 3 days walk. And guess where I ended up? The ancient city of Elath, which was the #1 place, but I had no way to reconcile how it got there. So if you reason with me, when they walk 3 days out of the wilderness, they're at Elath, and Moses doesn't record they got water. Well, the story in my family is that my ancestor was the governor. He was elected governor of Elath. He opened the wells and the grain storehouses and fed them. There were so many of them they couldn't get in. You know, Elath was a city of maybe 100,000. It was a port city and a trade route city, and it was the most important trade city once you left Egypt. And the Lord hit me with that, and I had to go back to my publisher and my publicist and say, I got some things I've got to revise here because the Lord just knocked me down and showed me that Capocyront was Elath. So even the story that my ancestor met Moses is true in the stories that we have. So this book is gonna knock your socks off. I am fortunate to have been selected to be his scribe. Um, I don't think there's been another book like it in the last 2,000 years.
Well, thank you for sharing your heart, Bruce. And I know, just like everyone else who's watching, I have been listening and just amazed at the amount of knowledge and information that you've been able to share. And I know that you've been described, but it's incredible, what you've written. And I just want to encourage everyone, this is a book that you really need to read. It's called The Truth versus the Great Lie. And such an important book for Christians and the church to grab a hold of and read. And so I want to tell you where you can grab it. And I'm just going to give you a few of the big ones. And that's Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iTunes. You can also get it at Reader House. And it's also available as an ebook, which is amazing because you can grab it, download it, and start reading right away. Bruce, thank you so much for sharing your heart, your passion, this book with us. It sounds absolutely incredible. And we sure do appreciate the time that you have taken to give us all of this incredible information and knowledge. And I hope that everyone goes out and grabs this book because I promise you it will be an incredible read for you. So thank you, Bruce, again for joining us.
Thank you.